Hello, my good friends. Welcome back. We will today be looking at Chapter 2 of Caleb Mappin's book, BreadTube Serves Imperialism. It's almost 50 pages. It is an absolute slog, but thank you for stopping by. This is a recording of a stream that I did. The video quality is not great. My internet is terrible, and so it's recorded basically using a toilet roll, but hopefully you still enjoy it. Before we get into it, I just want to thank my wonderful patrons. In Puppy Preschool, Ben Snow and Extremely Online Left, my guard doggos are Jordan Mark and Tristan Hennessy, and to A. Zeitlo, Dangwin and Jackson Orville, you are very good boys. If you're interested in supporting the channel, please head on over to patreon.com/onlydog-on-the-left. Without much further ado, let's get into BreadTube Serves Imperialism. I'm going to be reading more from Caleb's book, BreadTube Serves Imperialism. It's already horrendous. Very, very terrible. So, I guess getting straight into it, we've got Chapter 2, which is about 40 pages long. We are indeed, unfortunately, back. So, the name BreadTube is derived from a book published in 1892 by anarchist Russian activist Peter Kropotkin. I'm going to say it was only this year that I realized that BreadTube had something to do with Kropotkin. I just assumed that it was linked to how white all of LeftTube was. I literally just thought BreadTube was like LeftTube so white. But now so Caleb's one up on me on this one. So there you go. So the book, entitled The Conquest of Bread and nicknamed The Bread Book, is considered a primary text of anarcho-communism. In the book, Kropotkin critiques both feudalism and capitalism, proposing a decentralized, voluntarist, collective society as the alternative. Peter Kropotkin's ideas were fundamentally opposed to those of the Bolsheviks, who ultimately toppled the Tsarist autocracy and later established the Soviet government in October of 1917. However, to discount Kropotkin and his ideas would be mistaken. That's poor writing. The legacy of Peter Kropotkin. Kropotkin was born in the Russian aristocracy, but from his youth he became dedicated to the liberation of the Russian peasantry, who were brutally repressed. Kropotkin joined the International Workingmen's Association, the First International, and worked alongside some of the most important revolutionary thinkers of the age. He spent years in prison for his beliefs and took great risks. And when the Russian Revolution occurred in 1917, Kropotkin embraced it as a positive development despite his criticisms and ideological differences. When Kropotkin died in 1921, Lenin personally approved a funeral procession of thousands of people to march in his honor. In 1957, the Soviet government named a subway station in his honor. God, talk about repetition in writing. You can't end unless that is a literary device, ending each following sentence like that with "in his honor," which it isn't. You shouldn't be doing that, Caleb. Like I said yesterday, I will edit your books for you. You're probably also not going to like a lot of the comments that I leave in the margins, but there you go. Kropotkin's influence spread well beyond Russia. Many anarchists and leftist intellectuals across the world found his work and writings to be inspiring. Among those who were influenced by Kropotkin's work was a young man named Mao Zedong. Before joining the Chinese Communist Party at its founding Congress in 1921, Mao Zedong was the leader of a Kropotkinist organization called the New People's Study Society, and many see the influence of Kropotkin popping up throughout Mao's life as a revolutionary and statesman. The primary difference that Kropotkin had with the Bolsheviks was about who in Russian society should be the focus of the revolutionary movement. Kropotkin's focus was on the peasantry as the backbone of a potential revolution, while the Bolsheviks, as Marxists, viewed industrial workers as the sector of society where revolutionary work should be focused. Kropotkin rejected some of Marx's economic ideas, arguing that the concept of surplus value was mistaken. As an anarchist, Kropotkin argued that a post-capitalist society could only be built voluntarily, and that attempts to reform or seize political power were a waste of time. Kropotkin's vision was for the Russian peasantry to seize control of land themselves and begin growing crops cooperatively, much like German peasants had done during the event of 1524 to 1525. Kropotkin was an agrarian socialist rather than an industrial one. Kind of surprised that Caleb is talking about Kropotkin in a positive light. I know, it doesn't. He doesn't have the snark and the vitriol that he usually directs at people that aren't full-on Marxist-Leninists. Chapters 4 to 12 of his magnum opus, for which the BreadTube community has taken its name, are dedicated to laying an intricate vision of his ideal society of a decentralized, voluntary socialism with vast abundance. Kropotkin writes, "Citizens will be obliged to become agriculturalists, not in the same manner as peasants who wear themselves out ploughing for a wage that barely provides them with sufficient food for the year, but by following the principles of market gardeners' intensive agriculture, applied on a large scale by means of the best machinery that man has invented or can invent. They will reorganize cultivation, not in 10 years' time, but at once, during the revolutionary struggles, from fear of being worsted by the enemy. Agriculture will have to be carried on by intelligent beings, availing themselves of their knowledge, organizing themselves in joyous gangs for pleasant work, when man invents and improves his tools and is conscious of being a useful member of the community." Kropotkin's writing has an almost religious faith in the good intentions of human beings and their willingness to cooperate without coercion, combined with a gentle pacifism that fears the cruelty of authoritarian structures. He writes, "We shall see then what a variety of trades mutually cooperating on a spot of the globe and animated by the social revolution can do to feed, clothe, house, and supply with all manner of luxuries millions of intelligent men. We need write no fiction to prove this. What we are sure of, what has already been experimented upon and recognized as practical, would suffice to carry it into effect, if the attempt were fertilized, vivified by the daring inspiration of the revolution and the spontaneous impulse of the masses." So I will say, once again, another point for Caleb. He's actually including references to the works of these people. Very interesting. However, despite holding a vision of a voluntary society where all cooperate with each other in the absence of coercion, Kropotkin was not opposed to using force and violence to achieve his goals. The anarchist organizations and networks he associated with throughout Europe advocated propaganda of the deed, the use of bombings and assassinations in the hopes of sparking a rebellion among the wider population. How much Kropotkin was directly involved in such activities remains unclear, but it is clear that many people who were inspired by Kropotkin's teachings and worked with his organizations engaged in left adventurist terrorism. What? Did he just make that up? I've never heard of that before in my life. In 1916, most anarchists and revolutionary socialists were protesting and opposing the war between imperialist powers. Kropotkin published his Manifesto of the 16 that announced support for British and American imperialism in their war against Germany, Austria, and Turkey. This earned Kropotkin a large amount of scorn and was seen as a slap in the face and betrayal of the many socialists like Rosa Luxemburg and Eugene Debs, who went to prison for opposing the war. Peter Kropotkin is a figure that is worthy of respect despite criticisms of his political line and actions. He was willing to make great sacrifices and take great risks on behalf of oppressed peasants and factory workers, and he did a great deal to put forward a vision of post-capitalist society that would resolve the injustices of the world. Marxists, of course, reject left adventurism and terrorism along with idealistic fairy tales. They favour instead to build a mass movement of workers to seize control of the state and create a rational, centrally planned economy to eliminate all scarcity, marching towards the ultimate goal of a stateless, classless world. I mean, so I know he's a Marxist, but, like, no, we're not going to go into it. He can have it. That being said, he very clearly has at least done somewhat of a misunderstanding of Kropotkin. Yeah, and he is going to, like, I'm surprised that he's been so good faith about Kropotkin, seeing what we did in both the introduction and chapter 1. But yeah, obviously he doesn't just have a perspective, he is biased towards his ideology. For example, Kropotkin's work, Fields, Factories and Workshops, Kropotkin wanted a joint revolutionary act in between industrialists and agriculturalists. Yeah, and this is where it's because Caleb has to differentiate anarchists, Kropotkinist, anarchists from Marxists, so that down the line he can talk about how BreadTubers are only Kropotkinites and blah, 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 and they want the peasants something. I'm sure that's going to come up. But yeah, so yeah, misrepresenting the work for a specific purpose. The fact that the BreadTube internet universe claims Kropotkin's legacy and presents itself as the main representative of not just Kropotkin's ideas, but all anti-capitalism in 21st century America is deeply problematic. The intellectual laziness and shallow analysis So shallow analysis could be the subtitle for this book, Caleb. Presented by various BreadTube voices is a total disservice to his legacy, however complex it may be. The Mayor Kropotkin, yeah, right? Zoe Baker has more reliable info on anarchism. Yeah. There's a lot of... And so this is the thing that I think Caleb is... This is where he's maybe confused. Because he was talking about, in chapter 1, none of these people are associated with any organizations. And here, like the fact that the BreadTube internet universe claims Kropotkin's legacy and presents itself as the main representative of not just Kropotkin's ideas, but all anti-capitalism in 21st century America, like, I don't think they do. It's a bunch of, individual content creators who are all kind of academic and, as such, enjoy talking about ideas and enjoy analysing things and obviously have their own perspectives and ideologies. I think Caleb is trying to, because he is part of organisations, and that's the kind of role that he sees, a vanguard organisation taking. And so he has to, in his mind, his kind of ontological view is that, well, then BreadTube must be an organisation, and as such, because they're more popular than, whatever communist organisations Caleb's a part of now, and they're not saying what he wants, they're a counter gang, and they're paid by the CIA, and blah, 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 blah. Instead of just recognising that the fact that individual content creators on YouTube now can just become popular and famous, and they talk about the left. So I think he's gone off half-cocked. I like this chapter better because it's funny to read over the clattered grammar mistakes. At least in this one, he isn't making gross character Yeah. This is, it's a nice little Wikipedia article, or it's a bit of a news article about the history of blah, blah, blah. As opposed to, like you said, just the really vile shit that he was saying yesterday. Well, saying in the previous chapter that I was saying yesterday. The Marxist definition of capitalism. The teachings of Karl Marx understand socialism to be a result of the innate human drive for progress and the expansion of productive forces. For most of humanity's existence, we lived as hunter-gatherers in tribes. The first social revolution came with the domestication of animals and the growing of crops. The dawn of agriculture brought forth a new mode of production and a new set of social relations to correspond with it. Soon society was divided between landowners and slaves. Eventually, feudalism, a more efficient mode of production, replaced slavery. In the 1700s, capitalism emerged in Europe as the mercantile classes replaced the kings and nobles, and industrial production replaced subsistence farming. Capitalism resulted in the creation of two social classes, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. The bourgeoisie are those who own the banks, factories, land, means of transportation, and other centres of economic power and operate them in order to make profits. The rest of society makes up another class, the proletariat, a class Marx described as the modern working class, developed a class of labourers who live only so long as they find work and who find work only so long as their labour increases capital. These labourers, who must sell themselves piecemeal, are a commodity like every other article of commerce and are consequently exposed to all the vicissitudes of competition, to all the fluctuations of the market. I mean, that's an excellent description of 1700s and early 1800s, like the kind of industrial revolution landscape, 100%. The interests of the capitalists who own the means of production and the workers who sell their labour power to capitalists are diametrically opposed. Capitalists seek to drive wages down and maximise their profits. As a result, workers form unions and organise strikes in the hope of increasing their pay and bettering their conditions. Capitalism is defined by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels as a system in which the means of production are privately owned and operated to make profits for those who own them. Marx described capitalism as the anarchy of production. Engels explained, for in capitalistic society, the means of production can only function when they have undergone a preliminary transformation into capital. Mao Zedong, the leader of the Chinese Communist Party, said that capitalism was a system of profits in command. The capitalist system is defined as a system of production for profit. I know, bro, the fact you mentioned banking makes me nervous. I mean, I'm sure it's nothing, but still, no, I've seen some little excerpts from some of his live streams, and he does talk about international bankers quite a bit. So we'll see where it goes. The capitalist is always looking to make production more efficient in order to increase his profits. As Marx explained, the bourgeoisie cannot exist without constantly revolutionizing the instruments of production and thereby the relations of production. The capitalist seeks to hire the least amount of workers, replace human labour with machines, de-skill jobs, and make human labour more easily replaceable, all in order to churn out more and more products for lower and lower cost. The capitalist seeks to increase his profit margin, so those profits can be reinvested and his operations can expand only to make more profits, which can then be reinvested again. This is what Marx referred to as the general law of capitalist accumulation. Driving down labour costs, however, has an unplanned side effect. The purchasing power of workers is derived from the wages they are paid. In the drive to efficiently produce goods and maximise profits, the capitalist system is prone to cyclical crises of overproduction. The workers cannot afford to buy back the products they produce. The market becomes glutted with products that cannot be sold. As a result, prices drop, companies go out of business, and workers lose their jobs because too much has been created. Marx wrote in his text The Poverty of Philosophy, "From day to day it has become clearer that the production relations in which the bourgeoisie moves have not a simple, uniform character, but a dual character, that in the self-same relations in which wealth is produced, poverty is also produced, that in the self-same relations in which there is a development of the productive forces, there is also a force producing repression, that these relations produce bourgeois wealth, i.e. the wealth of the bourgeois class, only by continually annihilating the wealth of the individual members of this class and by producing an ever-growing proletariat. This problem of abundance creating poverty is uniquely capitalist. In previous systems, people starved because not enough food had been created, but in capitalism, starvation can occur because too much food has been produced. In previous systems, homelessness resulted from a lack of housing, but in the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis, when the housing bubble burst, many Americans lost their homes or became homeless because too much housing had been constructed. I don't think that's a fair representation of the subprime crisis. Like financial speculation was the biggest, one of the biggest contributors to that. And, go off on that, but it's not just because too many homes had been constructed. Marxists often will cite a parable dialogue between a coal miner and his son. Also, was it Mansa Musa, who was like the richest person in history, a West African king? And when he traveled through, I believe it was ancient Rome, he threw out so much gold that Rome had inflation for 2 years after that. So it's not just, and that was well before, even feudalism. So, I mean, again, it's all very reductionist and all very simplistic. So, son, father, I am very cold. Why can't we light the stove? Father, we cannot light the stove because we don't have any coal. Son, why don't we have any coal? Father, because I lost my job at the coal mine and we do not have any money to purchase coal. Son, why did you lose your job at the coal mine? Father, because there is too much coal. Okay. Friedrich Engels explained why cyclical economic crises result from the built-in problem of production organized for profit in his text Socialism, Utopian and Scientific, writing, the whole mechanism of the capitalist mode of production breaks down under the pressure of the productive forces its own creations. It is no longer able to turn all this massive means of production into capital. They lie fallow, and for that very reason, the Industrial Reserve Army must also lie fallow. Means of production, means of subsistence, available labourers, all the elements of production and of general wealth are present in abundance. So, I'm not a Marxist. I think there are interesting ideas in Marx. I like listening to Richard Wolff talk, but that could be because of his kind of Jersey or New York little, colloquialisms. But Marx was writing about the same time as Charles Darwin. And Charles Darwin, also, revolutionary. But people today that are interested in evolution aren't only looking at Charles Darwin. Like, that's now an introductory text. And they are looking at all the advancements that have happened in the field of evolutionary studies over the last, 170-ish years? Caleb's preoccupation with, understanding the theory and going back only to this kind of thing, it's like, what's happened since then, dude? Like I said before, he tried to take Carl's, we're on first name terms, where he tried to take Marx's, one of his pieces of, writing and apply it wholly to the 2008 financial crisis, which it wasn't. Like, it didn't just map onto it one-to-one. Like, maybe there is stuff in Marxism that you could apply to the subprime crisis, but it wasn't just that capitalism bad. It was specifically about the bundling up of debt and the financial speculation on that debt. Your voice is great. You should do audiobooks. Oh, thank you. Also, I don't think it's Manson Munza anymore. Pretty sure Musk and Bezos surpassed him now. That's depressing. My day is ruined. The trials and tribulations of Caleb Mappin, the wandering leftist. He is wild. Imperialism, the capitalism of our time. Much of BreadTube's discussion of capitalism centers around the inequity of relations between employers and employees. This is certainly a very big aspect of Marxian analysis of capitalism. Marx described the alienating environment of the worker, the way workers are reduced to appendages of machines who sell their labor power to the employer like any other commodity. Marx described how the worker is not paid the full value of his labor, with the surplus value being stolen from in order to become the profits of the capitalist. However, the bulk of Marx's analysis was focused on the problems that flow from production being organized for profits, as shown above. The irrational profit motive leads to capital centralizing into fewer and fewer hands, gluts overproduction, poverty amidst plenty, and all kinds of social chaos. In the aftermath of Marx's death, Vladimir Lenin analyzed the further development of capitalism. So I'm just going to stop here and go back up for a second. So I think where he's going to go, and one of the things that I also am not upset about, but wish that, people on the left could do more of, is international relations. And so that was my degree. And so, also I'm not American. And so when the vast majority of the analysis is on kind of American capitalism and individuals in that system, like, I get that, but I think there is a lot of space that the left is giving up to the kind of people on the right who have very oversimplistic answers and analysis of international relations, but that they're the kind of only voices in that space. So I think I can agree on that kind of premise, but I doubt we're going to agree where it goes. Lenin showed that increasingly the industries became dominated by financial institutions and that the banks who supply credit become the central institutions in Western countries. In the 1890s, capitalism in the United States, Britain, France, Germany, and other Western countries became dominated by huge conglomerates. Banks and industries tied together in huge trusts as multinational corporations spread their tentacles across the globe. The Western monopolies worked to stop economic development in Africa, Asia, and Latin America and maintain their dominance in global trade. Excess commodities were dumped onto the developing world that served as a captive market. This higher stage of capitalism was called imperialism. So, being a modern history teacher, I don't agree. I don't think imperialism has to have a capitalistic... Oh, I've just realized why they call it why imperialism for them has to come from capitalism, because then it means that, like, the Soviets weren't imperialist, right? Okay. I get you, Lenin. Lenin described the 5 stages of imperialism. We have to begin with as precise and full a definition of imperialism as possible. Imperialism is a specific historical stage of capitalism. Its specific character is threefold. Imperialism is monopoly capitalism, parasitic or decaying capitalism, moribund capitalism. The supplanting of free competition by monopoly is the fundamental economic feature, the quintessence of imperialism. Monopoly manifests itself in 5 principal forms. 1. Cartels, syndicates, and trusts. The concentration of production has reached a degree which gives rise to these monopolistic associations of capitalists. 2. The monopolistic position of the big banks. 3, 4, or 5 giant banks manipulate the whole economic life of America, France, Germany. 3. Seizure of the sources of raw material by the trusts and the financial oligarchy. Finance capital is monopoly industrial capital merged with bank capital. 4. The economic partition of the world by the international cartels has begun. There are already over 100 such international cartels which command the entire world market and divide it amicably among themselves until war redivides it. The export of capital as distinct from the export of commodities under non-monopoly capitalism is a highly characteristic phenomenon and is closely linked with the economic and territorial political partition of the world. 5. The territorial partition of the world colonies is completed. Yeah, the actual meanings of the words is kind of important. Yeah. Okay, I just realized he hasn't talked about BreadTube in a while. Maybe this is the proper amount of setup needed, but I don't know. I've never written a book. Probably had more fun. Oh, it froze. Well, I hope you can hear me again now. Yeah, he's not like I said last night. It seems as though he's had a couple of run-ins with a couple of people on BreadTube, and he's decided to write an entire book debunking them, but he's got nothing except, all of this stuff, obviously he knows about Marx and Lenin and the Soviet Union and the history of blah, 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 because he loves it all. This is his jam. This is his bag. But, he said basically nothing about BreadTube for ages now. It's just like, CIA ops and there's some bad people. Anyway, let me tell you about Lenin. Blah, blah, blah. Okay. It is because of this global setup called imperialism that Nigeria can be the top oil-producing country in Africa, exporting more of this valued commodity than any other country on the continent. Yet they still have only 62% literacy, along with a very low life expectancy and a high infant mortality rate, according to the CIA World Factbook. Bro, you hate the CIA. What? You can't quote the CIA World Factbook. You fucking hate them. Oh, bro. Is the CIA World Factbook where he also learnt that BreadTube are the main representatives of Marxism online? It is because of imperialism that Honduras and Guatemala... Okay, so this is his weird reductionist... Like this is where he's showing his bias. Because like modern monetary and fiscal policy and the interaction that it has in a globalized system is very complex. Like, all of these things are very complex. And yes, there are things like exploitation and all of that, and, countries continuing to exploit Africa, obviously. But just to say it is because of imperialism that Honduras and Guatemala are drug and gang-infested countries where much of the population lacks access to education and running water. Like, dude, you can't just make that, like, particularly when you're just looking at... Yeah, right? You can't just quote the CIA like that when you hate them so much. But yeah, and he's using something from 100 years ago. Like this list of 5 things that Lenin came up with. Lenin, who was also not ideologically neutral. Like and look, critical theory, like in international relations, also says that everybody is talking about something. But sorry, he's an ideologue, isn't he? I guess that's what I just need to be like. Oh, Caleb the ideologue. He's read all the Marx. He's read all the Lenin. He loves them. He loves the Soviet Union. Okay. In comparison, Nicaragua, which has broken out of imperialism, has been able to roll back poverty and raise living standards. What does he mean by broken out of imperialism? The Central American countries that have economies and governments dominated by the United States are kept poor, subject to foreign domination and impoverishment. When the British colonised India and Bangladesh, they burned the looms and forced people that had been weaving for thousands of years to import their cloth from British textile mills. In more recent... But why is that, dude? Like, you can't just say it like that, as though that... the East India Trading Company. Like, you need to go into the history of why that is. And it's because specific companies were going to India. Like, you can't... okay. I get you. He's not exactly impartial. No, he's not. But he's not upfront about that either. If he came out and said, look, I'm a Marxist, here's all the things I believe, and as a Marxist, I'm going to tell you this. But he doesn't. Like, he just states, when the British colonized India and Bangladesh. Like... Okay, in more recent times, a North American free trade agreement devastated the agricultural sectors of Mexico, Haiti, and other countries. Writing for the New York Times. So now we trust the New York Times? Oh, earlier it was like advertisements in... Okay. On November 24th, 2013, Lara Carlson explained. As heavily subsidized US corn and other staples poured into Mexico, producer prices dropped and small farmers found themselves unable to make a living. Some 2 million have been forced to leave their farms since NAFTA. At the same time, consumer food prices rose, notably the cost of the omnipresent tortilla. As a result, 20 million Mexicans live in food poverty. 25% of the population does not have access to basic food, and 1/5 of Mexican children suffer from malnutrition. Transnational industrial corridors in rural areas have contaminated rivers and sickened the population, and typically, women bear the heaviest impact. Much of the developing world is very rich in terms of natural resources and human labour. In order to maintain a monopoly, the Western multinational corporations, with full support of the government apparatus and international institutions like the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the World Trade Organizations, force countries into unnatural poverty due to foreign economic domination. And this is all historical as well. Has he made any connection to how any of this shows us how BreadTube supports imperialism, or did I miss something? No, not really. The mechanism for enforcing the rule of Western monopolies is war. If countries break out of the grip of Western capitalism and begin to develop their economies, they become subject to attack. If one looks at the economies... Wait, what? The mechanism for enforcing it is like the IMF and the World Bank and the WTO. If one looks at the economies of Russia, China, Venezuela, Iran, Cuba, Syria, or any other country the imperialists target for regime change, one will see a level of independence and striving toward development that the international monopolies cannot permit. Often this independence is directly related to the most valuable commodity in our outmoded fossil fuel economy, petroleum. Wait, Iran. What does he back the revolution? Like in the 80s? Was it 78 or 88? Like with the Shah. Caleb. All right. Vincent Copeland's text Expanding Empire describes in clear terms the nature of imperialist economics. Economics. Wow, I can't even read. The expansion into foreign countries resulted from a new stage in the expansion of business, the export of capital. Business had been exporting ordinary commodities of trade for centuries. The export of capital was something new, especially for the United States, and it couldn't be done without foreign wars. The reason for this isn't very complicated. The export of capital goods, that is, machinery, mining equipment, railroad engines, earth-moving tools, etc., is intended not to make just a quick small profit, but a constantly repeating profit that can go on forever. If the exploiter can hold onto the investment of capital in a foreign country should be regarded somewhat like sending a huge suction pump. The pump pulls out the metals from the ground, the products from the soil, and the fruits from the trees, with the help, of course, of the labour of the native people working on this suction pump. It is as if the pump were connected to pipes that run back to the home country via the banks and big corporations. All the rich products are showered from the pipes into the treasures of these institutions in the form of profits. Whole nations are drained by these great suction pumps or investments, and the profits are so great that rival groups of big business, led by small cliques of big banks, go to war with each other over the exploitation of these nations. I will just say, going from not doing any quotations when he was talking about like all the people that he disagrees with to now these, like the quotations are too long. It's not enough of his own work. Yeah, Caleb supports the Iranian revolution and he's even done some work for Iranian state media. Of course. Because they're anti-US and everything that the US does is bad. Okay, and so it's that thing that I was saying before then, that imperialism has to be an outshoot of capitalism, because then you can look at socialist countries and you can't accuse them of imperialism. Oh, man. We're back, finally. BreadTube voices tend to talk of capitalism in merely the simple factory floor analogies rather than... I don't think I've ever heard... Maybe like ContraPoints has done factory floor analogies. But nearly all the BreadTubers that I've heard talking about capitalism talk about it as in like service industry jobs and stuff, like the majority of the jobs that most people are doing now in the West, rather than understanding the concentration of global economic power in the hands of monopolistic associations. BreadTubers talk of pencil factories, where workers produce the pencils, but a capitalist gets the profits. These analogies are certainly relevant in understanding the nature of capitalist production, but BreadTube voices obscure the big picture for a microcosm that obscures analysis of global events. Like, could you give us an example? No, he can't, can he? Which is interesting, given Caleb isn't on good terms with Jason Uri, who works for Press TV. Lots of MLs support the economies of Iran, Russia, and Ukraine as if they're not capitalist imperialists. All right. See that Jason, who is it? Unruh? I'm just going to say Jason. I think I've seen people, seen thumbnails of, response videos to him, but I've never actually even, listened to anything. But is there lots of, infighting on the ML tanky left, is there? Basically two people who effectively work for the state who don't think highly of each other. Furthermore, BreadTube voices tend to argue that anything resembling Lenin's analysis of capitalism in its imperialist stage is somehow anti-Semitic. BreadTubers will often claim that references to bankers, international bankers, or globalism is merely a coded repackaging of Nazi conspiracy theories about Jewish global domination. This allegation is absurd and would render not just all adherents of Marxism-Leninism, but also many liberal critics of globalization, such as Noam Chomsky, Arundhati Roy, and Naomi Klein, to be Nazi propagandists. But, so they're not... Okay, when people point out the thing about international bankers, they're not saying you are a Nazi propagandist. They're saying, that train of thought can end not well. Like, watch out, because people do couch their terms, like the far right, the alt-right, do couch things that they believe about Jewish people as international bankers. 3 brackets, Like, he's so disingenuous, even when... okay. The world is not dominated by low-level businessmen who own individual factories, but by an elite of ultra-rich, globally oriented capitalists. These capitalists do not focus their business efforts on a single national market. The ruling class of Wall Street and London are globalists, and they dominate the world economy with gigantic financial institutions, international banks. To analyze a world of gigantic multinational corporations that beat down entire nations simply in terms of the inequity between the owners of an allegorical pencil factory and his employees is simply inadequate. By declaring analysis of gigantic corporations or finance capitalists dominating the world to be fascist or Trump-like, BreadTube is, in essence, blocking out and cancelling essential contemporary Marxist analysis. Okay. I think I said yesterday when reading the first chapter, or even the introduction, like, he views it not as, systems, but as it's this very US focused view, where individuals dominate. Evil oh yeah, someone was saying how on his streams he's always talking about how the people he disagrees with are evil. And that's what he's viewing it, because so I'm obviously Australian, you can pick that. But seeing right-wingers in the US be so preoccupied with Fauci, it's not one dude that's ruling, the health of America. He is the head of, I assume, I'm pretty sure he's the head of the CDC or something, but these are entire organizations. He's not just out here, one man being, quote unquote evil, but they're treating it like that. I mean, and, in that sense, it's a very easy fix. You get rid of Fauci and the evil man is gone. For Caleb, you get rid of these evil ruling class and then apparently the world is going to be better? Dude, LMAO, Jason and Caleb are quarreling and it's way funnier than you think. Jason claims that Mappin is working with the CIA to frame him of owning CP. Oh, man. Oh, my, how the turntables. And it's the ultimate... So I teach the French Revolution in year 11 on history. And the ultimate irony is when Robespierre eventually gets guillotined himself. Hilarious and ironic. The fact that now other communists are accusing Caleb of working with the CIA, that is just oh, that's beautiful. Lenin's understanding of imperialism enabled him to reorient much of the Marxist movement. Marx argued that all nationalism was a barrier to workers' solidarity, though in his later life, he became somewhat sympathetic to the Irish freedom struggle. Marx argued that European colonialism was bringing development and progress to places like India. Lenin's understanding of how capitalism developed in the late 19th century laid the basis for revolutionaries embracing the national liberation struggles of colonized people. As the Chinese Communist Party's document Long Live Leninism, published April 16, 1960, summarizes, Lenin pointed out that the oligarchy of finance capital in a small number of capitalist powers, that is, the imperialists, not only exploit the masses of people in their own countries, but oppress and plunder the whole world, turning most countries into their colonies and dependencies. Imperialist war is a continuation of imperialist politics. Jason vs. Maupin is like Godzilla versus King Kong. And they're both accusing the other of being CIA funded. Lenin understood that an aristocracy of labour, a strata of well-paid workers, enabled European social democratic parties to become reformist and eventually support the First World War. Lenin saw that the revolutionary energy was coming from the East and the colonised world. In the light of the law of the uneven economic and political development of capitalism, Lenin came to the conclusion that because capitalism developed extremely unevenly in different countries, socialism would achieve victory first in one or several countries, but could not achieve victory simultaneously in all countries. So he's just stating this. Lenin understood. But you're not justifying it, dude. Like, you just, like, it's just stating it as though it's, like, established fact. Lenin argued that socialism in the developing world would come about with the working class leading the struggle to liberate entire nations from the yoke of imperialist domination. Because of the stratification of the working class within the imperialist homelands and the rise of social reformism and the aristocracy of labour, communists in Western countries had a special task. The liberation movements of the proletariat in the capitalist countries should ally themselves with the national liberation movements in the colonies and dependent countries. This alliance can smash the alliance of the imperialists with the feudal and comprador reactionary forces in the colonies, all dependent countries, and will therefore inevitably put a final end to the imperialist system throughout the world. I mean, there is... So... And this is the problem, is like he's skipping over all the interesting stuff. There's so much interesting history around like decolonial movements. Like, was it 63 that the president of Indonesia, Sukarno, went and gave a speech at like was it the Bandung conference? Super interesting. Like, that anti-colonialist stuff, there's actually rich history. To just put it all down to, Lenin was right. So, yep, you got to be a Marxist-Leninist, and that's why BreadTube's wrong. That's why a bunch of 20-somethings on the YouTube are wrong. Imperialism, the rule of the world by Western monopolies who keep the world poor in order to make themselves rich, is the capitalism of our time. Okay. Opposing capitalism in our times means opposing imperialism. Okay, this is his whole point, and this understanding is essential, especially for those living in the imperialist world centres. The lack of any analysis of imperialism and anti-imperialism, and the constant allegation that those who do analyse such things are covert anti-Semites, reveals a very big flaw in the BreadTube sphere and its viewpoints. But dude, like, you are constantly alleging that people that you don't like are like covert CIA operatives. Like, what are you talking about? What page are we up to? Okay. God, I think we're about halfway there for this chapter. The Marxist definition of socialism. Marxism views socialism as resolving the inherent contradictions of capitalism, a system of production organised to make profits. Socialism is when the means of production become public property and are forced by the state to serve society overall, not the profits of private owners. I thought capitalism was the capitalism of our time. I mean, yeah, the fact that it's still around would lead one to believe that capitalism is in fact the capitalism of our time. It's almost like imperialism is the imperialism of our time. Marx did... Oh, okay. And so Caleb's thinking that he's like a continuation of this revolutionary like lineage, and now he's fighting the capitalism of our time, which is imperialism, because everything's changed. And to do that, he has to try and shit on Thought Slime. Okay, Marx distinguished between the higher stages of communism, the ultimate ideal of a stateless, classless world, and the lower stage of communism, i.e. socialism. Marx, Engels, Lenin, and other scientific socialists specifically defined socialism, the lower stage of communism. In the Communist Manifesto, Marx wrote, "The proletariat will use its political supremacy to wrest by degree all capital from the bourgeoisie, to centralise all instruments of production in the hands of the state, i.e. of the proletariat, organised as the ruling class, and to increase the total productive forces as rapidly as possible." Of course, in the beginning, this cannot be effected except by means of despotic inroads on the rights of property and on the conditions of bourgeois production, by means of measures, therefore, which appear economically insufficient and untenable, but which, in the course of the movement, outstrip themselves, necessitate further inroads upon the old social order, and are unavoidable as a means of entirely revolutionizing the mode of production. These measures will, of course, be different in different countries. Almost as if the time of our time is the time of our time. Marx went on to list in the Communist Manifesto 10 measures that the proletarian might adopt. The original 10 rules for life. Upon taking power in order to enact the transition to socialism. Tell me that rule number 1 is clean your room. All right. This list is commonly misrepresented by libertarians and rightists who point to planks such as income tax and public education as proof the USA is already a communist country. Social democrats and reformists will also sometimes misrepresent this list. In his pamphlet, Socialism, Utopian and Scientific, Friedrich Engels also defined socialism. He wrote, "The proletarian seizes the public power and by means of this transforms the socialized means of production, slipping from the hands of the bourgeoisie into public property. By this act, the proletariat frees the means of production from the character of capital they have thus far borne, and gives their socialized character complete freedom to work itself out. Socialized production upon a predetermined plan becomes henceforth possible." Using different words, Engels explained, whilst the capitalist mode of production more and more completely transforms the great majority of the population into proletarians, it creates the power which, under penalty of its own destruction, is forced to accomplish this revolution. Whilst it forces on more and more of the transformation of the vast means of production, already socialized, into state property, it shows itself the way to accomplishing this revolution. The proletariat seizes political power and turns the means of production into state property. So, but this point, this is where you can tell they're writing 170 years ago, because capitalists also understand this. They understand that if you just have the vast majority of your nation is an underclass, they're going to revolt. Was it a couple of years ago that Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, I think, together released a book Moral Capitalism, or the moral case for capitalism, or why capitalism has to become moral, something like that. Because they recognize, and that's why they're not totally, let's ignore the United States for a minute, because they seem very extreme. But in most countries, you have, universal healthcare. You have superannuation systems and pension systems. You have means of public support. You have state-run public transport. These conditions don't exist anymore, at least not in the West, which is Caleb's audience, So he also wrote, "This point is now reached. Their political and intellectual bankruptcy is scarcely any longer a secret to the bourgeoisie themselves." Oh, there you go. Their economic bankruptcy recurs regularly every 10 years. In every crisis, society is suffocated beneath the weight of its own productive forces and products, which it cannot use, and stand helpless, face to face with the absurd contradiction that the producers have nothing to consume because consumers are wanting. The expansive forces of the means of production burst the bonds that the capitalist mode of production had imposed upon them. Their deliverance from these bonds is the one precondition for an unbroken, constantly accelerated development of the productive forces, and therewith for a practically unlimited increase of production itself. Nor is this all. The socialized appropriation of the means of production does it away, not only with the present artificial restrictions upon production, but also with the positive waste and devastation of productive forces and products that are at the present time the inevitable concomitants of production, and that reach their height in the crises. Further, it sets free for the community at large a mass of means of production and of products, by doing away with the senseless extravagance of the ruling classes of today and their political representatives. The possibility of securing for every member of society by means of socialized production an existence not only fully sufficient materially and becoming day by day more full,
but an existence guaranteeing to all the free development and exercise of their physical and mental faculties. This possibility is now, for the first time, here, but it is here, with the seizing of the means of production by society. Production of commodities is done away with, and simultaneously the mastery of the product over the producer. Anarchy in social production is replaced by systematic, definite organization. The struggle for individual existence disappears. Then, for the first time, man, in a certain sense, is finally marked off from the rest of the animal kingdom and emerges from mere animal conditions of existence into really human ones. God, like I said before, way too much quotation. Like, dude. But also, again, like, we have had other things come into play since then. And maybe he has talked about this, but what is his view on Keynesianism? Like, what is his view on modern monetary policy? Like, these things have been implemented to try and deal with some of the contradictions within capitalism. Some are more effective, some are less effective. Why'd you almost spit out yogurt? Oh, it said before that Marx released a list of 10 things that the proletariat could do, and I was like, the original 10 rules for life. And hopefully the first one was clean your room. And then, by step 10, after clean your room, step 10 is revolution, In his book, The State and Revolution, Lenin defined... It has got boring. I'm hoping to try and power through the rest of it and then just make a video about how bad of a person Caleb is. Just a gross little person. But thank you for coming. Defined socialism, the lower stage of communism, in the following passages. It is this communist society which has just emerged into the light of day out of the womb of capitalism, and which is in every respect stamped with the birthmarks of the old society. The Marx terms the first or lower phase of communist society. The means of production are no longer the private property of individuals. The means of production belong to the whole of society. Every member of society performing a certain part of the socially necessary work receives a certificate from society to the effect that he has done a certain amount of work, and with a certificate he receives from the public store of consumer goods a corresponding quantity of products. After deduction is made of the amount of labour which goes to the public fund, every worker therefore receives from society as much as he has given to it. Lenin also clarifies, the first phase of communism, therefore, cannot yet provide justice and equality. Differences and unjust differences in wealth will still persist. He then goes on to make clear, and so, in the first phase of communist society, usually called socialism, bourgeois law is not abolished in its entirety, but only in part, only in proportion to the economic revolution so far attained, i.e. only in respect of the means of production. Bourgeois law recognizes them as the private property of individuals. Socialism converts them into common property. To that extent, and to that extent alone, bourgeois law disappears. Marx wasn't a statist. Probably the most blatant distortion of Marxism that is spread in the BreadTube universe is the belief that somehow Marx did not believe in creating a centrally planned economy or having the means of production become public property. As the previous quotations make clear, this is the very definitive act of the social revolution that overturns capitalism and creates socialism. Yet with smug arrogance and childish desperation, the BreadTube voices insist that this cannot be the case. After all, they have been told by US media and educational institutions that each and every society where this transformation has taken place, it has resulted in a brutal human rights violating dictatorship and utter economic failure. I mean... Wait, is he going to defend Stalin? Oh, man. Lacking the courage to question these narratives, like a biblical creationist confronted by the fossil record, they seek to reinterpret Marx so both he and mainstream US media can be correct. They wish to uphold Marx, but discount and dismiss all who have put his ideas into practice in order to maintain respectability within and funding from the very institutions and society Marxism seeks to overturn. Matt Thoughtslime insists that Marx and Engels never called for a centrally planned economy. In a video released on February 5, 2021, wow. I'm almost positive that this is the first BreadTube video that he has referenced. Like almost 80 pages into his book about BreadTube. Wow. Entitled Prager University Does Not Understand Democracy, the content creator simply bluffs, pretending that the quotations above do not exist and assuming that their audience will never bother to fact-check assertions. How? Can you give us a... So he gives us the video and the title of the video, but no actual quotes from it. Where's the bluff? Furthermore, Matt goes on to claim Lenin personally invented the idea of a centrally planned economy, calling his newly invented concept democratic centralism. A simple Google search for the term democratic centralism shows how laughingly inaccurate and ignorant this social media appointed expert is. He's not a social media appointed expert, it's someone that makes videos, bro. Democratic centralism was the model for decision-making in Lenin's Party of a New Type. Democratic centralism was a process through which the Bolshevik Party made decisions and obligated all members to carry them out. It's distinguished the Vanguard Party model from the looser social democratic organizing methods of the Russian Social Democratic Labour Party, i.e. the Mensheviks. It has nothing to do with economic planning in a socialist state. It is a method of political organizing by Marxists under capitalism in order to take power. Such a gaffe should be embarrassing and discrediting, but Matt Thoughtslime has not been discredited for spreading such blatant misinformation. Over 200,000 people have watched this misinformative video about socialism, most of them probably believing its contents to be accurate. Oh man. Ian Koczynski also claims with the authority of the algorithm. With the authority of the algorithms. So, is Caleb also a little salty that his videos don't do as well as these guys? These other people's? Frequently claims Marx wasn't a statist. To justify this, he utilizes a quotation from Marx's Civil War in France. Matt Thoughtslime also invokes this quotation, where Marx proclaims the working class cannot simply lay hold of the ready-made state machinery and wield it for its own purposes. The misuse of this quotation seethes with ignorance, if not blatant intentional deception. Caleb, you would know about blatant intentional deception. The passage comes from Marx's presentation Civil War in France, in which he discusses the Paris Commune of 1871. This briefly existing regime that took power in Paris after the capitalist government had already surrendered to the Prussian invaders is considered by Marx to be the first historical example of his concept of dictatorship of the proletariat. Marx points to the Commune not as an example of why states are not necessary, but rather for the lessons it taught about what post-capitalist states will look like. The particular quote refers to the fact that the existing French state had been created to serve capitalism, and the Paris communards who led the workers' uprising were forced to create new state institutions, not simply seize control of the previously existing ones created by capitalism. Marx spends the following paragraphs describing in detail the nature of the new proletarian forms of state power the communards created and praising them. To claim this quote means Marx opposed states existing at all as laughable. Oh God, here is the entire passage from Marx. So 2 people on YouTube misquoted Marx or took a quote out of context, and it's getting pages from Caleb. Like, this doesn't... out of a 200-page book, this thing so far has got more than 1% of the entire time. And his claim is that BreadTube serves imperialism. Although now we know what he means by imperialism. So, yeah, I guess it's a lower bar than I had thought. All right, here is the entire passage from Marx. But the working class cannot simply lay hold of the ready-made state machinery and wield it for its own purposes. The centralized state power, with its ubiquitous organs of standing army, police, bureaucracy, clergy, and judicature, organs wrought after the plan of a systematic and hierarchical division of labour, originates from the days of absolute monarchy, serving nascent middle-class society as a mighty weapon in its struggle against feudalism. Still, its development remained clogged by all manner of medieval rubbish. See seigneurial rights, local privileges, municipal and guild monopolies, and provincial constitutions. The gigantic broom of the French Revolution of the 18th century swept away all these relics of bygone times, thus clearing simultaneously the social soil of its last hindrances to the superstructure of the modern state edifice raised under the First Empire, itself the offspring of the coalition wars of old semi-feudal Europe against modern France. The direct antithesis to the empire was the commune. The cry of social republic, with which the February Revolution was ushered in by the Paris proletariat, did but express a vague aspiration after a republic that was not only to supersede the monarchical form of class rule, but class rule itself. The commune was the positive form of that republic. The first decree of the commune, therefore, was the suppression of the standing army and the substitution for it of the armed people. The commune was formed on the municipal councillors, chosen by universal suffrage in the various wards of the town, responsible and revocable at short terms. The majority of its members were naturally working men or acknowledged representatives of the working class. The commune was to be a working, not a parliamentary body, executive and legislative at the same time. Instead of continuing to be the agent of the central government, the police was at once stripped of its political attributes and turned into the responsible and at all times revocable agent of the commune. Public functions ceased to be the private property of the tools of the central government. Not only municipal administration, but the whole initiative hitherto exercised by the state was laid into the hands of the commune. The judicial functionaries were to be divested of that sham independence which had but served to mask their abject subservience to all succeeding governments, to which in turn they had taken and broken the oaths of allegiance. The unity of the nation was not to be broken, but, on the contrary, to be organised by a communal constitution and to become a reality by the destruction of the state power which claimed to be the embodiment of that unity, independent of and superior to the nation itself, from which it was but a parasitic excrescence. Okay, so what Vash claims about his cherry-picked quotation is nothing but blatant distortion. Either Koczynski was handed this quote by someone else. He said this earlier as well in previous chapters, that someone else is doing his research, and never bothered to look at the context, or he intentionally misrepresented its meaning with deceptive intent. To claim Marx was arguing that no central authority or state power should exist is simply inaccurate. On the contrary, Marx was emphasizing how new forms of state power must be created to correspond with a new class in power and its interests. So that was 4 pages out of 200, and not even all 200 have writing on them. So at the very least, 2% of his entire book was dedicated to just one Marx quote that 2 YouTubers took out of context. It really has no, it has nothing to do with this. Dude. All right. Maintaining what? 82. Okay, we're almost there. Maintaining profits in command. Armed with his misrepresentative quotes from Marx, Ian Vaush Koczynski, I am so annoyed at this book and how it is presented. We know it is Ian Vaush Koczynski. Dude, edit your fucking writing. Seriously. This is so fucking annoying. I can't, I feel sorry for people who paid for this. It's just the most amateurish bullshit fucking writing. All right, let's continue. Armed with his misrepresentative quotes from Marx, Ian Vaush Koczynski has repeatedly said that socialism in the United States would mean everything would be exactly the same except every corporation would be a worker cooperative. Maybe. I don't know if he said that. Maybe he has. He said a lot of bullshit. But no reference. You gave a reference to Matt's video. Why not a reference for this one? While worker ownership and cooperatives are not a bad thing, the problem with this definition of socialism is that it does not eliminate capitalism. Capitalism is a system where, as Engels put it, the means of production only function as preliminary transformation into capital, or as Mao Zedong put it, profits are in command. Simply instituting worker ownership does not eliminate what Marx called the anarchy of production. But okay, even if it doesn't, like I've already established that he's not giving any recent economic analysis. Like Marx wrote this 170 years ago. Maybe things have changed, dude. Maybe our understanding from the very rudimentary forms of capitalism that Marx was looking at. It would capitalism was revolutionary back then. It's been around for a while now, and it's been mitigated to differing degrees in different parts of the world over the past 170 years, and particularly over the last, I would say, 100 years. You need to talk about that more. Employee stock ownership programs, co-determination, co-partnership, or profit sharing are not at all foreign to capitalism. Furthermore, those putting forth these ideas have generally not been socialists, but theoreticians and academics assigned with the task of making capitalist corporations more productive and efficient. Okay, but if it increases people's material conditions, surely that's a good thing. He's just got this stick up his own ass about being a Marxist and being a Marxist activist, and apparently wanting to be the most prominent Marxist activist on YouTube, I guess. While BreadTube adherents fetishize the Mondragon Corporation, a federation of worker cooperatives located in the Basque region of Spain, the examples of such schemes within the capitalist system are much more widespread. The Oxford University Act of 1854 in Britain required that the faculty of the university be represented on the board of directors. The Port of London Act of 1908 passed such a requirement for representation of dock workers on the board governing London's port. The Weimar Republic in Germany passed the Supervisory Board Act of 1922, requiring labour unions to have representation on the board of directors of corporations. Many Western European countries maintain such laws up to today. In the United States, the retirement plans offered to many corporate employees are described as profit-sharing plans, where the pension paid to retirees is related to the performance of the corporation. Many employees across the USA and the world have stock options, incentive pay, and other mechanisms that theoretically make them co-owners of the corporation in which they work. Many different stock ownership, employee representation, and co-ownership programs exist, and they vary in their degree of success. During the 1920s and 30s, industrial unions often fought hard against piece wages. Often, factory employers would attempt to maximize their profits by paying employees only for each item produced, rather than a set hourly wage. In 1938, the labour movement celebrated the passage of the Fair Labour Standards Act, which required all employees receive a minimum hourly wage on top of whatever incentives or productivity-linked wages they received. These reforms brought a new level of economic security to industrial workers because they knew how much money they would receive rather than having their income subject to the unpredictable fluctuations of the market and however many products the capitalists assign them to produce on a given workday. BreadTube adherents will generally dismiss the many examples of their ideas being put into practice within capitalism. Will they? Will they generally? So sometimes, not generally, they don't dismiss them? What do they say about them then? They will insist that piece wages, employee stock ownership programs, worker representation, co-partnership, and profit sharing are not enough. They will say they advocate 100% worker ownership and democratic control. Dude, that's what you're saying. That's your whole thing here, is saying that, well, all this stuff, it might be good, but it's not enough. So, okay. However, no matter how egalitarian and democratic a worker cooperative model may be, it still does not eliminate the very essence of the capitalist system, profits in command. A worker cooperative will seek to maximize profits for its employee shareholders. But why? If it's the proletarian and they understand all this, Like, not everybody is inherently selfish. They might vote not to do that. Like, people in corporations vote to, like, freeze their pay increases in order to offset layoffs. Like, some people are going to get fired and they will vote that, no, rather than that happen, we'll freeze our pay increases for a year or 3 years or something. So they're not always seeking to maximize their individual profits, dude. Imagine... yeah. Oh, another hypothetical from Caleb that I'm sure I'm going to love. Imagine if the US defense industry were operated under a worker cooperative model. Would this end the military-industrial complex long decried by leftists? Would the drive to make profits from war no longer influence US foreign policy? Not at all. If anything, the lust for war profits would expand beyond the corporate boardrooms to the factory floor. Why? Employees would be motivated to see the government go to war and for government military spending to increase, as it would directly impact their incomes. Caleb, you're just assuming, like, you're fucking assuming all the same things about, like, quote-unquote human nature that libertarians do. Like, this is a very capitalistic way of viewing people. Like, not everyone's out for themselves like this, dude. Kind of telling on yourself, though. Like, if he was in the defense industry and it was a worker cooperative model, he'd be like, no, fuck the government, fuck peace. Let's get going with that war. Having the guards as equal democratic co-owners of private prisons would not eliminate the inherent societal problems flowing from the much decried prison industrial complex. Having workers as equal co-owners of pharmaceutical giants would not eliminate the drive to overprescribe potentially addictive or dangerous medications. Dude, this is so... Oh, man. What a gross view of people he has. Other problems inherent to the capitalist system of production for profit would continue as well. Employee owners would certainly be incentivized to replace labor with machines. No, you wouldn't. You're the labor. Oh. As the fewer workers hired by the cooperative firm, the larger their share of the profits would be. Employee-owned enterprises would compete with other employee-owned enterprises producing the same products and services. Environmental regulations and laws affecting other externalities would still be an impediment to the profits of corporate owners, just as they are now, even if the corporate owners were the employees themselves. Yeah, but the employees themselves are the proletariat. They don't have all the bourgeois interests that the bourgeois do. Like, normal people don't have the same interest to, like, fuck over like environmental protections that, you know, Elon Musk does. Particularly when they would, like, be able to view the trade-off. They might get an extra $50 a week, but they would know that their trading off is, like, the environment. It's different for Elon Musk because he might get $50 million a week. And that's a bigger trade-off for him. That's a better... Oh, man. A system of profits in command is still irrational and unsustainable, even if those profits are shared. Simply declaring workers to be co-owners of profit-centered entities functioning in the chaos of the market does not eliminate the irrationality of capitalism. In the context of a centrally planned economy, worker cooperative ownership is very different. The most successful examples of worker cooperatives tend to be those that emerge in the absence of the anarchy of production when an overall state central plan guides their activities. The most successful example of a profit-sharing corporation by far is one that BreadTube avoids highlighting. The largest telecommunications manufacturer in the world is Huawei Technologies, a cooperative corporation established by the Chinese government and its military in 1988. An article in Harvard Business Review published on September 24, 2015, hails it as a case study of when profit sharing works and speaks of the company in glowing terms. In the context of China's 5-year economic plans, receiving huge subsidies and directions from the state and military, Huawei has become very successful. The model of worker ownership, profit sharing, and coordination with state central planning and a socialist economy has made Huawei a model that many corporations in the capitalist world have studied. Huawei is widely respected for its efficiency and success. Sorry, but doesn't Huawei sell outside of China? Aren't they then, like, engaging in all the same, like, capitalist the chaos of the market and crap that Caleb was talking about. Kind of weird that he doesn't bring that up. Okay. Of course, BreadTube voices largely remain silent on Huawei as it takes its lead from the US State Department, deeming anything associated with China or other anti-imperialist states to be toxic and evil. Fuck off, dude. Oh, man. I'm just getting to the end of my tether because I'm starting to swear when I was trying not to swear at all during these streams. He's just so arrogant as well. Elements of worker ownership have been implemented in many socialist countries. The collectivization of agriculture in 1931 resulted in the prevalence of collective farms as the dominant form in the Soviet countryside. While some state farms that operated much like state-owned factories existed, most of the Soviet Union's agriculture was carried out by independent kolkhozy, which sold agricultural goods to the state at a set rate. This motivated the farm workers to produce as much as possible in order to maximize the payout they would receive from the central government. This model became the dominant form of agriculture in really existing socialism of the Cold War beyond the Soviet Union. Mao Zedong launched the creation of a collective farm system with his Hail the Communes campaign in the 1950s. Cuba, North Korea, and various Eastern European countries adopted the collective farm model. Trotsky criticized this. I was wondering if Trotsky was going to make a... all right, of course he fucking hates Trotsky. Arguing that state farms were more socialistic in nature than collective farms, and arguing that material incentives and differing abilities among farmers would lead to inequality. Stalin defended this model, arguing it was more efficient. Che Guevara and Mao Zedong both upheld the collective farm model as being more egalitarian and decentralized, and presented the Soviet Union as being a bit too centralized and bureaucratic in its planning of production, leading to a lack of participation by the working class and a level of alienation. During the Cultural Revolution in China, the model of a 3-in-1 combination was adopted, where each factory was governed by an elected worker representative, as well as a Communist Party official and a technical expert. Mao Zedong put forward the 3-in-1 combination as an alternative to the model of total factory autonomy put forward during the infamous January storm of 1967, which established the Shanghai People's Commune. Joseph Broz Tito developed a model of worker self-management. That's a full stop. Albania declared this model to be state capitalism because it relied on material incentives to motivate labour, but other socialist countries considered Tito's model to be more effective. Tito's worker self-management model was most likely a big influence on Deng Xiaoping's reform and opening up policies in 1978. Vietnam and Nicaragua have developed self-employment programs where workers become individual entrepreneurs in coordination with the state's overall vision. What fucking tangent are we on now? How is this having a go at BreadTube? Venezuela has created many collectivos and communes which produce goods and render services while being subsidized with state revenue and directed by state central planners. Worker cooperatives are not bad, but the fetishization of them and the rejection of the need to eliminate the anarchy of production distorts the nature of socialism. BreadTube's insistence that socialism is everything exactly the same except every corporation is a cooperative is particularly problematic in the context of imperialism. BreadTube's insistence. So he went earlier from saying that Vaush said this multiple times, didn't provide any examples, but okay, maybe Vaush has said this. And now it's BreadTube's insistence. Fuck, dude. Just... Capitalism in the 21st century involves huge multinational corporations based in Western countries reaping super profits at the expense of the developing world. Wars are waged to enforce that system, with socialist and anti-imperialist governments being the primary targets. Imperialism is a global economic order in which the world is made poor and kept poor so that the finance capitalists of London and Wall Street can remain rich. Simply offering a greater share of the super profits of empire to the workers within the imperialist homeland is not dismantling this global system. If anything, it is a scheme that would likely stabilize and enhance it. Citation needed, bro. The myth of the 20th century. How long have we got? All right. Underlying BreadTube's redefinition of socialism is the same motivation and sentiments that are highly present in Trotskyism, anarchism, social democracy, and other brands of left-wing anti-communism. All right. In the United States, anti-communist propaganda about the 20th century is widespread and inculcated among the population. It is so central to the rhetoric of every faction in the ruling class that repeating it is almost mandatory for any voice that seeks to avoid being marginalized. In order to conform to the party line that is almost universal among every faction of the US ruling class, BreadTube must accept the premise that communism failed everywhere it has ever been tried. Bro, they don't. They don't say that. Like, maybe Vaush does? Maybe he's just watched a whole bunch of Vaush? It's brutal. It is tragic that so many adherents of socialism who claim to oppose the capitalist system are so cowardly that they cannot state what is obvious. Socialism works. When Yale economist Dr. Richard Wolff debated Stephen Destiny Bennell, he confronted this mythology head-on, proclaiming, "I have no idea what this silly remark that I so often hear, that no socialist society has succeeded at anything. I have no idea what you are talking about. Let me give you an example. One of the most important metrics used in the economics profession around the world to assess the success of an economic system is the rate of economic growth. You measure GDP and you look at how it grows over time, and then you compare one country to another to assess their relative success, not as societies, because that's a vague generality. It's not the only metric, but it's a widely used one, so I'm now going to use it. In the 20th century, the fastest growing GDP in any country measured was the Soviet Union. And in the 21st century we're living in, the fastest growing GDP in the world has been the People's Republic of China. This is not an endorsement of one or another economic system. It's a statement of facts verified by any reliable source of information, the UN, the projects of the University of California at Berkeley, and others who keep track of this. So I'd say that Richard Wolff is pretty prevalent on BreadTube. Like, Mexi is always talking about him, and I believe that Mexi's had him on. A bunch of people like have talked about Richard Wolff. Like, he's a leading left-wing economist. Bennell quibbled, trying to say that Japan had been more successful than the Soviet Union and that the industrialization of the USSR was irrelevant because many countries underwent similar growth at the time. Wolff further ripped this illogic to shreds, proclaiming, "Those are the facts. You can play whatever games you want. The fact of the matter is that the Soviet Union's performance in the 20th century completely outshines that of Japan. In 1917, when the Soviet Union began, it was the poorest country in Europe by far. It then goes through 70 years of World War I, of a civil war, of collectivization, and of World War II, which did more damage in Russia than in any other country. Notwithstanding that it was the poorest country at the beginning of this horrific story, it ends up in 1965 being the number one competitor of the United States for global hegemony. That's only because of its number one status in economic growth that it achieved the overcoming of all those horrific losses. I'm not arguing in favor of this or that about the Soviet Union, but the fact of its achievement is a staggering reality that you can dance around today and tomorrow, but it doesn't go away because it is inconvenient to confront it. The same thing is true now. If you read Pearl Buck's novels about China before the revolution, you read about a society whose depth of poverty literally blows your mind. And here they are about to surpass the United States by the end of this decade. And that was accomplished by a communist revolution and a government that has been run by a communist party to this day. BreadTube's insistence that socialism is merely a worker cooperative scheme reveals further the thesis of this book. Okay, I'm just going to pause here because one of the biggest advocates of worker co-ops is Richard Wolff. His book is literally what's it called? It's not on my shelf right here. I lent it to my friend. Cooperative democracy or democracy at work. It's Democracy at Work, where he talks about the importance of worker co-ops. And you've just had 2 pages quoting him, blowing Destiny out of the water. Destiny, who isn't even fucking part of BreadTube. I ended up making that old mouthy yells at cloud thing. That is excellent. I cannot wait to see that. All right. BreadTube's insistence that socialism is merely a worker cooperative scheme reveals further the thesis of this book, that I hate BreadTube, that BreadTube is dumb and ugly and no one even wants to ask him out. The BreadTube is largely the creation of the more powerful globalist wing of the ruling class in its efforts to beat back the rebellions of Trump and lower-level capitalists. The pro-imperialist narrative where communist revolutions only made life worse, is repeated by BreadTube voices, despite being overwhelmingly inconsistent with reality. Do you have any evidence that they're saying these things? Is that why he included Destiny? So he could, in this part, like say that Destiny disagreed with the Marxist and therefore Destiny's bad, when Richard Wolff is actually more prevalent on BreadTube and made those claims? Because BreadTube targets the same governments that the US State Department targets. What? And repeats the same narrative of targets the governments. What are you talking about? Oh, God. And repeats the same narrative of the 20th century that is widely promoted in US society. It also allows the most common argument against socialism to go unchallenged. Right-wingers have long mocked the comment, "That's not real socialism," which BreadTube-aligned voices frequently fall back on. Evidence. Again, evidence, bro. During the Iraq War, right-wingers who taunted leftists would carry sarcastic placards reading, "Communism only killed 200 million people, let's try it again." What? There is a refusal of leftists to challenge the historical record, not about human rights or the shortcomings of existing socialist societies, but about basic economic data. This is the greatest weakness of the socialist movement in the United States. However, it fits with the overall weakness of BreadTube's analysis, which is a refusal to confront or discuss imperialism in an age where Western capitalism is imperialism. So there's that. I'm pretty sure I've heard Thought Slime recommend. Is it Vicky1999? I think that might be the YouTuber. Vicky1999. The real death toll of communism. And they go through and they actually look at, all of these claims, from the Black Book of Communism and et cetera, et cetera. And they've also done a video called The Real Death Toll of Capitalism. So this kind of thing is not like brushed off or disagreed with by leftists on YouTube. Like, dude. All right. Basic economic data shows that the Soviet Union had a consistently high rate of economic growth throughout its existence. In 1917, Russia was an agrarian, undeveloped country. You've literally just included like a page-and-a-half quote from Richard Wolff about this very thing. You can't then just go on and reword it. By 1936, the Soviet Union was fully electrified and had become an industrial powerhouse. The Soviet Union produced more steel and tractors than any other country in the world. It wiped out illiteracy, built a modern university system, and constructed some of the largest power plants in the world. In the field of culture, the Soviet Union spawned the films of Sergei Eisenstein, the music of Shostakovich, and some of the greatest ballet performers and Olympic athletes. There is a lot of gymnastics moves named after Russians. I'll give them that. With an economy where the state controls the major industries and banks and issues 5-year economic plans, China has become the second largest economy on Earth, lifting 800 million people from poverty. Cuba's achievements in terms of healthcare and literacy are marveled at by international observers. Prior to the fall of the Soviet Union, North Korea experienced huge explosions of growth with Soviet aid. A BBC article from August 26, 2008 admits the mass mobilization of the population, along with Soviet and Chinese technical assistance and financial aid, resulted in annual economic growth rates estimated to have reached 20%, even 30% in the years following the devastating 1950-53 Korean War. As late as the 1970s, South Korea languished in the shadow of the economic miracle north of the border. It's pronounced kind of like Shostakovich. Shostakovich. Okay. Thank you, Shostakovich. Ba'athist Arab socialism in Iraq and Syria. Oh, fuck. Don't you tell me that he's going to... Oh. Ba'athist... Oh. Not Saddam Hussein. Tell me no. Ba'athist Arab socialism in Iraq and Syria resulted in massive economic achievements in terms of literacy, education, and industrialization. Years of pro-Western regimes have not undone the great achievements of Gamal Abdel Nasser, who took great strides to industrialize Egypt, constructing the Aswan Dam in coordination with the Soviet Union. Kwame Nkrumah, Julius Nyerere, Muammar Gaddafi and other African revolutionaries who established socialist planned economies achieved similar victories in terms of basic societal health. The Islamic system labelled not capitalism but Islam, in which the state and the Revolutionary Guards control the commanding heights of economic power, has resulted in a huge level of development in Iran. Criticisms of these societies related to issues like human rights, consumer goods, or other issues are certainly reasonable. Thank fuck. To say Marxist-Leninist governments and anti-imperialist states never accomplished anything or only made life worse is a sick joke that is completely contrary to all basic economic data. Who said that? Give us some examples. If BreadTube is just generally saying these things, wouldn't it be easy to find these examples? If you were writing and publishing an entire book about it, wouldn't it make sense to spend a couple of hours one day, maybe a Sunday, I don't know, scrounging through and just copying URLs? Watch all the videos on double speed. I don't care. Copy down some URLs so you can actually have some fucking references. Oh, Caleb. This is painful. However, BreadTube's vision of socialism as merely profit-centered worker cooperatives, its demonization of the very same governments the imperialists target, all make BreadTube a version of socialism that is deemed acceptable by the ruling class. In rare instances, BreadTubers will even defend cuts in social spending and the erosion of the welfare state, arguing that we don't want state socialism and socialism has nothing to do with the government. Who said that? Is that Destiny? What BreadTuber is defending cuts in social spending? That's one of the most fucked up things in this entire book. Who on BreadTube is defending cuts against, in rare instances, BreadTubers will even defend cuts? I guarantee it's Destiny. That's why he had to include him in it. Because it's like he had a big problem with Destiny after he had his debate with him, which we know he's pretty thin-skinned, so he would have stewed about it heaps. Started writing this book, fuck you, Destiny, fuck the left, and then realized that he's not even on the left. Somehow, various adherents of BreadTube various adherents of BreadTube thinking have determined neoliberal economics and austerity is not a threat to socialism because their worker cooperative schemes will still be permitted. Who? Who has said that? I could just write a book that's Caleb clearly thinks that the smell of his own farts is delightful, and that if more people were to smell his farts, Marxism-Leninism would become more and more popular. Finally, if every single human being in the world were able to smell Caleb's farts, Marxism and pure communism would be achieved. I literally went through every single Dennis Prager video and marked down every time he said Judeo-Christian values for a clip that I didn't end up making. I think Maupin should have been able to do that. Right? Also, that whole Judeo-Christian thing, right? All the Christians that work with, Dennis Prager and Ben Shapiro, they think that they're going to hell, don't they? Steven Crowder would think that Ben Shapiro is going to hell. right? I don't get that Judean-Christian thing, as in doing research. Yeah, exactly. All right. It is clear in my mind that makes up a whole bunch of shit that BreadTube has created a brand of socialism that is not very threatening to the status quo. Rather than calling for society to control the means of production, even a minimal class struggle program like stopping cuts in social spending or opposing imperialist regime change wars, BreadTube simply wants to experiment with profit sharing and employee stock ownership as imperialism and austerity are allowed to roll ahead. I mean, it sounds pretty bad when you put it like that, but like the problem is that you've given us no evidence. Dude, like, you have given us no evidence that the people that you disagree with believe this stuff. Link some fucking videos. Just give us a sentence in quotation marks. Vaush said this. Matt said this. ContraPoint said this. H-Bomber Guy said this. You introduced those people and you've talked about Matt and Vaush and Destiny. That's it. Just going to have a little bit more beer. Just wait. All right. Not surprisingly, this deviation from everything Marxists and socialists have advocated for hundreds of years, interesting, has been enabled to go viral and speak in the place of genuine anti-capitalism. Not surprisingly, BreadTube, famous supporters of austerity politics, especially Thatcherism. Yeah, man, that's why in the backgrounds of all their videos, they've got like pictures of Reagan and pictures of Thatcher. They love that shit. Oh, wow, what was that? An hour and 46 minutes for one chapter. And what page are we up to? 97. So now we're halfway through the book. Nazi, Nazi, Nazi. This is because he got accused of being a Nazbol. Because of him palling around with Alexander Dugin, who's the Nazbol guy, the nationalist Bolshevik guy. Oh, man. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining me. What's today? Tomorrow's Christmas Eve, so it'll probably be a couple of days before I do this next chapter, which will probably have a lot more to do with actual BreadTube videos. Like, I'm assuming that because he's going to be talking about being called a Nazi or calling everybody a Nazi, he's actually going to go back and look at some YouTube stuff. So that'll be nice, finally. But I hope you're enjoying this. I mean, enjoying me suffering, going through it. It gives me, because I've always thought, I can never write a book. That would, but now, wow, I definitely could. I might even throw in some references. Well, thank you very much, and I will see you all next time.